Game ontology is a study of fundamental game elements. The date is an especially topical theme, as the emergence and wide dissemination of computer games have prompted new debates on the nature of games. To argue, more game definitions have been elaborated in the last 15 years than ever before. Game researchers develop ontological questions about games in many different approaches and describe their results with game ontological models. Game ontological model is a description that answers the questions: what are games, what do they consist of, in which way their parts are connected, and so on. Some models identify the essential game features that make a game what it is. Other models map a particular domain of a game. The third kind of models typologize top-level game components, etc., etc. In game ontological research, the game world is usually addressed as one of the most fundamental game components. In the framework of von Wagen's meta-ontology, a game meta-ontological study should inquire about game ontological questions' meanings. In this manner, Orsett and Grabarczyk consider the meaning of game ontological descriptions with their ontological game meta-model. They developed their meta-model to connect, coordinate, and compare different game ontological models. I use the meta-model to compare 6 game ontologies containing a game world or its analogy as their key element. The first ontology is Salin and Zimmerman's model and its magic circle. By analyzing a set of game definitions, those scholars highlight 6 essential game features. Essential game features are those that are necessary and sufficient for something to be a game. In this way, they define the game as a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. And regarding the system element, Salin and Zimmerman identify 3 types of systems: real system, alpha system, and play system. This is how I include the game ontology in the meta-model. The key element here is artificiality. It covers all other elements and constitutes the magic circle, a concept originally derived from Huizinga's work Homologence. Salin and Zimmerman popularized this concept and therefore started a heated debate in the Huizinga tradition of game research. The magic circle of a game is the space within which a game takes place. Its boundaries define the game in time and space and separate it from real life. Through those boundaries, one enters a temporary world within the ordinary world. The concept was criticized from many perspectives. The most criticized thesis was that the temporary game world is somehow withdrawn from the reality of the ordinary world. Critics say that games always have a complex relationship with their cultural and social context. Therefore, we cannot withdraw a game world from the ordinary world. The author of the next game world ontology, Jesper Juhl, tries to defend the concept of the magic circle. However, he differentiates between this concept and the game world. Juhl's classical game model became a canon for those researchers who do not study game ontology specifically. This ontological model contains 2 layers. The first one is a description of essential game elements. Juhl uses Salin and Zimmerman's method. He analyzes several game definitions to highlight a set of essential game features. Among those definitions, he analyzes Salin and Zimmerman's too. Juhl comes up with 6 game elements and defines the game as a rule-based system with a variable and quantifiable outcome, where different outcomes are assigned different values. The player exerts effort in order to influence the outcome. The player feels emotionally attached to the outcome, and the consequences of the activity are negotiable. With this model, Juhl differentiates games, borderline cases, and not games, such as driving, war, and hybrid checks. The model received a lot of criticism too, since many legendary games, for instance Minecraft or Elder Scrolls series, are falling out of this model because they do not have a clear outcome or lack some other features. Another critical point is that with this model, Juhl closes game studies from expanding towards avant-garde projects that challenge our understandings of games. But this is just the first layer of Juhl's model. On the second layer, there are 2 components: real rules and fictional rules. Juhl says that playing means interacting with real rules while imagining a fictional world. Rules are real because they constrain and structure the player's behavior. At the same time, they provide a sense of direction. It helps player to imagine a fictional world as a holistic and coherent object. In computer games, the fictional world comes to the fore, since players do not need to remember and process game rules. Computers do this for them. In Yule's model, the fictional world is discussed from two perspectives. On one side, the fictional world can be described as a system of science. Conversely, the fictional world is an object in a player's mind. As I said earlier, Yule differentiates between the magic circle and the fictional world. He notices that the magic circle's boundary is clearly visible in computer games. An example of such boundary is an invisible wall. When players encounter it, they see that the fictional world is much bigger than the place they play within. Those boundaries are maintained by game rules. Therefore, a magic circle is situated at the intersection of real rules and the fictional world, and we can see that it is much smaller than the fictional world in his model. So the next ontology I consider is Orsed's simple game ontological model. Orsed works on the Wittgensteinian position toward games, meaning he uses nominal game definitions. Instead of identifying essential game elements, he refers to common usage of the word game. Orsed builds his model in order to make an example of a formal game ontological approach that does not require a game definition to describe what games are. In fact, his model is simple. Nevertheless, it is highly influential in game ontological research. At its core, the model consists of two elements: the game object and the gameplay. The game object splits into two material layers, mechanical and semiotical. The game world is a semiotic object. It informs players about the game through visual, auditory, and some other feedback. It is interconnected with the second, mechanical layer, meaning that the game world expresses the internal mechanistic system of the game. The engine that drives the game action allows the players to make their moves and changes the game state. What defines games among other media is that they exist on two material levels. In contrast, paint and canvas or ink and paper exist only on one material level. As Orsed writes in an earlier work, the internal coded level of the game can only be fully experienced by way of the external, expressive level. Furthermore, what goes on at the external level can be fully understood only in light of the internal. This is how I include Orsed's ontology into the meta model, considering some other nuances of it. The key element in the expanded version of Orsed's ontology is the implied game object. It complements the game world, so it becomes similar to Yule's fictional world. The implied game object is the idea of a game that players have in their minds. It is a flawless, real game without annoying bugs, where every path is taken and every secret is revealed. Orsed's student Weller develops this idea in his phenomenological game ontology. So in the next model that I consider, the implied game object covers all game elements except the phenomenal game object. The phenomenal game object is the game as it is given in the player's direct experience. Any other element, the code, mechanics, semiotic system, is only implied in the phenomenal game experience. Game cosmos is another key element of Wella's ontology. It is the understanding of the implied game object and abstraction of the gameplay experience. Between those ontological elements, Vella identifies the ludic sublime. It is an aesthetic moment that determines the player's inability to comprehend the vastness of a game. For example, it is astonishing to see Limgrave from a bird's eye view for the first time. The ludic sublime concept complements Orsed's implied game object and Yule's fictional world. It describes the incoherence between the vastness of the implied fictional world and the player's gameplay experience within a magic circle. The model that I just described is a simplified version of the ontology Weller developed in his doctoral dissertation. In this next ontology, there is no implied game object yet. Instead, Weller makes a sophisticated conception of the game world. He splits the game world into 6 parts. The first one, game world is the life. Direct personal lived gameplay experience. Then there is a theme in the game world, a game element which the player actually perceives and interacts with. Experience. The next element of the game is cosmos, an interpretation of a direct phenomenal gameplay experience. The game is cosmos splits in two parts, the game is system and the game is text, or heterocosm. As an example, all doors in a game are ontologically equal when we consider the game as a text. But the game is a
Nikita, we're losing
Yeah.
your audio a little bit. It looks like your Wi-Fi is cutting out.
Well, it's okay right now. Can you just repeat the last couple of seconds that you just gave us, maybe?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Do you see my slides now?
Yeah, you're good.
Yes, it's the audio that's cutting out a little bit. If you can go back 2 sentences.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So there is a game as Cosmos, an interpretation of a direct phenomenal gameplay experience. It splits in two parts. The first part is game as text. For instance, all doors are ontologically equal in a game, but when it comes to the second part of the game as Cosmos, the game as system, only particular doors can be opened from this perspective. Finally, there is the ludic materiality. It is a factual situation against which the player efforts to gain meaning. Weller also calls it the earth on which the players performs gameplay actions. Altogether, those elements constitute the game world, which can be discussed from three main perspectives: as a direct gameplay experience, as an ordered system which the player builds through the interpretation of their direct gameplay experience, and as the earth for a gameplay performance. The last model I consider is Secret's ontology of playthings. He builds his ontology from a perspective of new materialism. Therefore, he identifies a plaything as an assemblage of materials and agencies as a result of the practice of play. Basically, anything can become a plaything if we are able to play with it. In Secret terms, when we play with playthings, we re-ontologize the world, meaning we structure the reality and our agency within it. We do so by creating play worlds, temporary worlds within the ordinary world. Play worlds are models of the ordinary life. They are projects that we fill with our values and meanings. In this sense, we can use play worlds as blueprints for changing our ordinary world. Here, Secret refers to Huizinga, but tries to avoid the odious Salin and Zimmerman's conception. He differentiates between the play world and the magic circle. His magic circle is an ethical restriction. Secret highlights that we put our values into play worlds and playthings. Those values can have a real impact on the ordinary world. As an example, if those values are discriminatory, they can really offend someone. Therefore, Secret's magic circle covers all metamodal levels except the social one, as the social level describes an interaction between players. It is unethical to make someone play within a magic circle if one doesn't want to play. On this slide, you can see all discussed models in Roset and Robarchik's meta model. First of all, we can see that the game world always covers meta model's communicational level. This level describes any information conveyed to the player, game aesthetics, and diegetic or non-diegetic science. Therefore, scholars usually consider the game world as a system of science, but they often suggest that it is not a sufficient description and therefore adds some other elements. Another point is that the game world often covers a significant part of the mental level. This level describes the game as played, the player's direct experience of a game, the interpretation of it, and any social interaction. Therefore, scholars usually suggest that players' agency constitutes the game world. In other words, players participate in creating the game world with their actions and ideas. Things are more diverse with the structural level. This level captures several formal abstract aspects of games, their code, mechanics, and economical features. In the most recent ontological developments, there is a tendency to include game structures into the game world. This tendency corresponds to a player-centric turn in game studies when scholars started to question games from the player's perspective. Finally, we can see that in early ontologies, the game world is immaterial since it doesn't cover the metamodel's physical layer. But later scholars started to consider the game world as a partially material entity. Both Salin and Zimmerman and Yule say that games are transmedial and therefore the game platform is not essential for defining them. In contrast, although Seeker's play world is not a thing among things, it requires real things to gain a foothold in them. In Seeker's conception, this means that we create play worlds by playing with playthings, the material entities. In the same way, Orso describes his game world as a material layer that has its foothold in the material game object. Even Weller's game world has some materiality. The game material object and the game world fuse together in the implied game object. Also, we can see that there are several concepts similar to the game world that either take its place or complement it. The most common concept is the magic circle. If Salin and Zimmerman identified with the game world, it is more common to distinguish those in the later ontological developments. Another concept is the implied game object. It derives from Yule's fictional world, since this object overcomes the player's actual experience of the game. However, Orso changes Yule's initial concept. With the implied game object, Orso differentiates between the game world as a semiotic system and the implied game object as the idea of the world in the player's mind. Weller expands the implied game object concept and provides even more additional concepts which constitute the game world as its elements. For instance, he includes Orset's game world as the game's text element. Finally, there is Seeker's play world, which is also different from the game world. In contrast with other researchers, Seeker is focused on the process of play instead of the game as system. Therefore, at the core of his play world concept is the practice of creating meanings and values. Those are the most basic results of a comparison of the game world concept. In future research, some particular aspects of the discussed models can be thoroughly analyzed. Also, some other ontological conceptions can be added to a comparison. I appreciate your time and attention, and I'm ready for your questions.